My name is Margaret Catherine Walsh, and I am 73 years old. I live alone now in a small house on the outskirts of Dublin, where the rain taps against my windows like fingers seeking entry. For 52 years, I have kept a secret that has grown heavier with each passing day, like a stone in my chest that steals my breath. I was once Sister Mary Catherine of the Sacred Heart. For 21 years, I wore the habit, spoke the prayers, and walked the cloistered halls of St. Bridget's Convent. I believed I was serving God. I believed I was safe. I believed many things that were not true. Tonight, as I sit at my kitchen table with only a single lamp for company, I am going to tell you what really happened within those walls. Not because I want to, but because I must. The weight of silence has become unbearable. There is a photograph on my mantelpiece, the only one I kept from those years. It shows the Sisters of St. Bridget's, 1971, standing in neat rows in our black habits, hands folded, faces serene. I am in the back row, third from the left. I was 28 then, still young enough to believe that purity of heart could shield me from the darkness that dwelt in holy places. Sometimes I catch myself staring at that photograph, and it feels as though those women, my former sisters, are staring back at me. Their eyes follow me around the room, silent and knowing. They remind me of promises I made, vows I took, and truths I buried so deep I thought they might never surface. But truth has a way of growing in the dark, like mushrooms after rain. It feeds on silence and shame until it becomes too large to contain. The rain is heavier now, drumming against the roof with an urgency that matches my heartbeat. I have written this story many times in my mind, but I have never had the courage to speak it aloud. Tonight, that changes. You see, St. Bridget's Convent was not what it appeared to be. We were not the protected daughters of Christ we believed ourselves to be. And the men who came to us, the priests, the spiritual directors, the confessors, they were not the holy guides we trusted them to be. I need you to understand something before I continue. This is not a story told in anger, though anger lives in me still. This is not a tale of revenge, though justice has never been served. This is simply the truth, told by an old woman who has grown tired of carrying it alone. The truth about what happened when the doors were locked and the prayers were said and the good people of the village thought we were safe in our holy sanctuary. The truth about why sisters disappeared in the night, why some of us learned to walk with our eyes cast down, why the sound of footsteps in the corridor after evening prayers could make your heart race with fear. I am telling you this not to shock you, but to honor the memory of those who could not speak for themselves. To break the silence that protected evil and destroyed the innocent. To ensure that what happened to us will never happen again. So pour yourself tea, settle into your chair, and prepare to hear what I have never told another living soul. This is my confession. Not to God, for I have long since made my peace with Him, but to you, to the world, to the future. The rain continues its relentless rhythm, and I begin. I was born into a world where God's will was never questioned, only obeyed. My mother, God rest her soul, was a woman of fierce faith and fiercer pride. She scrubbed floors at the rectory twice a week and considered it an honor. My father worked the docks and came home each evening smelling of salt and sweat, his rosary beads worn smooth from decades of Hail Marys. We were not wealthy, but we were good Catholics. That meant something in our neighborhood, where the priest's word carried more weight than the mayor's, and a girl's reputation was more fragile than spun glass. I was 17 when Father McKenna first suggested I might have a calling. I remember the moment clearly. I was helping my mother arrange flowers for the altar, and he watched me work with those pale, watery eyes of his. "You have gentle hands, Margaret," he said. "Hands meant for God's work." My mother nearly glowed with pride. To have a daughter called to serve the Lord, it was the highest honor our family could achieve. Higher than marriage, higher than wealth, higher than any worldly success. It would guarantee our place in heaven, she said, and wash away any sins that might stain our family name. But I wonder now if it was truly a calling I felt, or simply the weight of expectation. The pressure to be pure, to be holy, to be everything a good Catholic girl should be. I had made mistakes. Small ones, the kind that felt enormous at 17. A boy's hand held too long after Sunday Mass. A kiss stolen behind the church hall. Normal things that felt like mortal sins in the suffocating atmosphere of our faith. The convent seemed like salvation then. A place where I could be clean again, where my past would be washed away by prayer and devotion. My mother wept with joy when I told her of my decision. My father nodded approvingly and said it was God's will. I entered St. Brigid's on a grey October morning in 1965. I was 22, old enough to know my own mind, yet young enough to believe that walls could protect me from the world's corruption. The convent sat on a hill overlooking the village, its stone walls weathered by centuries of Irish rain. It looked like a fortress, and I suppose that's what I thought it was. The other novices were like me, young women seeking redemption, purpose, or simply escape from lives that felt too small to contain their dreams. We whispered together in the dormitory after evening prayers, sharing our hopes and fears in the darkness. We were sisters before we ever took our vows. Mother Superior was a woman of steel wrapped in black wool. She had been at St. Brigid's for 40 years, and the convent bore her mark in every swept corner and perfectly folded habit. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of absolute authority. We learned quickly not to question her decisions. The routine was rigid and comforting. We rose at 4 for lauds, worked until terce, studied until sext, and so on through the canonical hours that divided our days into neat, sacred portions. There was safety in the schedule, in the predictability of prayer and work and silence. But even in those early days, I sensed something beneath the surface. The way certain sisters fell silent when Father O'Brien came to say Mass. The way Mother Superior's jaw tightened when she spoke of our spiritual directors. The way some of the older nuns seemed to carry themselves differently. Heads down, movements careful, as if they were trying not to be noticed. I told myself it was my imagination. I was young, uncertain, still adjusting to the cloistered life. The men who came to guide us were holy, weren't they? They had been chosen by God to shepherd our souls. Who was I to question their presence in our sanctuary? Father O'Brien was our regular confessor, a man in his 50s with soft hands and a softer voice. He had been coming to St. Brigid's for years, Mother Superior told us. He knew our community well. He understood the special needs of women religious. During my first confession with him, I knelt in the small booth and recited my sins: pride, impatience, the usual failings of a novice. He listened in silence, then asked me to describe my temptations in detail. For spiritual guidance, he said. To better understand my struggles. Something in his tone made my skin prickle, but I obeyed. We were taught that obedience was the highest virtue, that our spiritual directors knew what was best for our souls. I spoke of my past, my fears, my moments of doubt. He listened with what I thought was compassion. You must be very careful, child, he said finally. The devil works especially hard to tempt young women like yourself. You must trust in those God has placed over you to guide your path. I left that confession feeling strange, as if I had given away something precious without understanding its value. But I pushed the feeling down. This was my new life, my chance at holiness. I would not let doubt poison it. The months passed. I took my first vows and became Sister Mary Catherine. I learned the rhythms of convent life, the delicate balance between community and solitude. I grew close to the other sisters, especially Sister Anne, who had arrived just months before me. We worked together in the garden, where the earth was rich and dark and things grew in their proper season. But gradually, I began to notice things. The way Sister Bernadette flinched when Father O'Brien approached. The way Sister Margaret Teresa had been transferred suddenly to another convent, with no explanation given. The way certain sisters were called for special meetings that were never discussed afterward. And the men. There were always men coming and going. Not just Father O'Brien, but other priests, monsignors, even bishops. They came for meetings with Mother Superior, for special masses, for spiritual direction. We were told to be grateful for their attention, their guidance in our religious life. But I began to notice how the atmosphere changed when they arrived. How conversations stopped mid-sentence. How some of the sisters seemed to disappear entirely, as if they had learned to become invisible. I told myself these were holy men, servants of God. But deep in my heart, in a place I barely acknowledged, a small voice whispered that something was wrong. Very wrong. It would be years before I understood just how wrong. The first crack in my faith came on a Tuesday in spring. I remember because the apple trees in our garden were blooming, their white petals drifting like snow across the path where I walked with sister and during our afternoon recreation period. We were discussing the lives of the saints, a safe topic, one that wouldn't earn us a reprimand for idle chatter. But sister Anne seemed distracted, her usual brightness dimmed like a candle in a drafty room. "Sister Catherine," she said suddenly, stopping beside the garden wall. "Do you ever feel watched?" I paused, uncertain how to answer. "We are always in God's sight, sister." "No." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I mean watched by others." Before I could respond, the bell rang for vespers, and we hurried back to the chapel. But her words stayed with me, echoing in the spaces between prayers. That evening, as I knelt in the silence after Compline, I found myself thinking about the watching. Was it my imagination, or had I noticed it too? The way certain eyes lingered too long during Mass. The way conversations stopped when we entered a room. The way some sisters seemed to walk with their shoulders hunched, as if trying to make themselves smaller. Sister Bernadette had been at St. Brigid's for 7 years. She was 34, with prematurely gray hair and hands that trembled slightly when she held her prayer book. She worked in the kitchen, and I had always admired her quiet efficiency. But now I began to notice how she never looked directly at the priests during Mass. How she seemed to find urgent tasks elsewhere whenever Father O'Brien visited. One morning, I found her in the pantry, standing perfectly still among the flour sacks and preserves. She was staring at nothing, her face pale as milk. "Sister Bernadette?" I touched her shoulder gently. "Are you well?" She startled as if I had struck her. Yes. Fine. Just tired." But her hands were shaking as she reached for a jar of honey, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before in a place dedicated to God's love: fear. The changes came slowly, like shadows lengthening at sunset. Sister Margaret Teresa had been transferred, we were told, to a convent in Cork where they needed someone with her particular skills. But I had seen her just days before, and she hadn't mentioned any transfer. She had been planning the Easter decorations, excited about the lilies that would bloom in time for the celebration. Then she was gone, and we were forbidden to speak of her. "We must not dwell on those who have left us," Mother Superior said. "Our focus must be on our own spiritual journey." But I found myself dwelling anyway. Sister Margaret Teresa had been vibrant, full of life and laughter. She had been the one who taught me to properly tend the roses, who showed me how to fold the altar linens so they lay perfectly smooth. She had been my friend. Sister Anne grew quieter as the weeks passed. She still worked beside me in the garden, but the easy conversation we had once shared became stilted, careful. She looked tired, older somehow, as if something vital had been drained from her. I began to pay closer attention to the rhythms of our life. The men who came and went. The meetings that took place behind closed doors. The way certain sisters were called away for special instruction, and returned hours later, silent and pale. Father O'Brien came more frequently now, sometimes staying for days at a time. He had been given a room in the guest quarters, Mother Superior explained, because his guidance was so valuable to our community. We were blessed to have such devoted spiritual direction. But I noticed how the atmosphere changed during his visits. Conversations became whispered. Sisters hurried through the corridors with their eyes down. Even the air seemed heavier, as if the very walls held their breath. One evening, after a particularly long day of his presence, I was walking to the chapel for evening prayers when I heard voices from Mother Superior's office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear Father O'Brien speaking in that soft, measured tone of his. "Young ones need special guidance," he was saying. "They don't understand the temptations they face. It's our responsibility to help them overcome their weaknesses." I should have walked on. I should have minded my own business and gone to pray. But something in his voice made me pause. "Sister Catherine shows promise," he continued. "But she asks too many questions. She watches too much. Perhaps it's time for her to understand her place more clearly." My blood turned to ice. He was talking about me. About questions I hadn't even realized I was asking aloud. I hurried away, my heart hammering against my ribs. That night, I lay awake on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what I had heard. What did he mean about helping us overcome our weaknesses? What did he mean about me understanding my place? The next morning brought a new fear. Sister Anne didn't appear for lauds. When I went to check on her, I found her bed empty, neatly made as if she had never slept in it. Mother Superior announced that she had been called away on urgent family business. But Sister Anne had no family. She had told me herself that she had come to St. Brigid's because she had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. I wanted to ask questions, but I remembered Father O'Brien's words about my curiosity. So I stayed silent, and the silence felt like swallowing glass. Days passed. Then weeks. Sister Anne didn't return. No one spoke of her absence. It was as if she had never existed at all. I began to feel like I was walking on shifting ground, where nothing was quite what it seemed. The prayers that had once brought me comfort now felt hollow. The safety I had found in routine began to feel like a cage. And the men kept coming. More of them now, staying longer. I learned their names, their faces, their particular ways of looking at us during Mass. Father Duncan, with his cold smile and calculating eyes. Monsignor Kelly, who spoke of God's love while his gaze lingered on the younger sisters. Bishop Crawford, whose very presence seemed to drain the warmth from a room. They were holy men, I told myself. Men of God. But the small voice in my heart grew louder, more insistent, whispering truths I didn't want to hear. Something was very wrong at St. Brigid's. Something that had nothing to do with God's love and everything to do with the darkness that can flourish in places where silence is considered a virtue and obedience is prized above all else. I just didn't know yet how deep that darkness ran, or how many of my sisters had already been lost to it. The summons came on a Thursday after evening prayers. Sister Frances, one of the older nuns who rarely spoke, appeared at my side as I was leaving the chapel. "Sister Catherine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mother Superior wishes to see you in her office." My stomach dropped. In the weeks since Sister Anne's disappearance, I had tried to keep my head down, to be the obedient novice I was supposed to be. But clearly I had failed. Mother Superior's office was a small, austere room dominated by a large wooden crucifix and a portrait of the Sacred Heart. She sat behind her desk, her pale eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Father O'Brien stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sit down, Sister Catherine," Mother Superior said. I obeyed, my hands folded in my lap to stop them from trembling. "Father O'Brien has expressed some concerns about your spiritual development," she continued. "He feels you may be struggling with pride." Pride. The deadliest of sins. The one that had cast Lucifer from heaven. I don't understand, Mother. "You ask too many questions," Father O'Brien said softly. "You observe too much. These are signs of a restless spirit, a soul that has not yet learned proper humility." I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I was simply trying to understand my place in this community. But the words died in my throat. These were my spiritual superiors. Who was I to question their judgment? "Your friend's Sister Anne suffered from the same affliction," Mother Superior continued. "She allowed doubt to poison her heart. She began to see darkness where there was only light, evil where there was only good." Where is Sister Anne now?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Father O'Brien's eyes narrowed, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger, but something colder. More calculating. "Sister Anne is no longer your concern," he said finally. "Your concern should be your own soul, your own obedience to God's will." "But I need to know." "You need to know nothing except what we tell you." Mother Superior's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This is what pride does, Sister Catherine. It makes you believe you have the right to question those God has placed over you." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I forced them back. Crying would only prove their point about my weakness. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean." "Of course you didn't mean to." Father O'Brien's voice was gentle now, almost kind. "Pride is subtle, sister. It creeps into our hearts disguised as righteousness. But we can help you overcome it." He moved closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne. Something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. "You will begin special spiritual direction with me," he continued. "Individual sessions where we can address your particular struggles. We must root out this pride before it destroys your vocation." "I don't think I need." "It is not your place to think," Mother Superior interrupted. "It is your place to obey. You will report to Father O'Brien tomorrow evening after Compline. He will guide you through the necessary spiritual exercises." The meeting ended with a prayer, one I barely heard through the roaring in my ears. As I left the office, I felt as though I were walking in a dream, where familiar things had taken on strange and threatening shapes. Back in my cell, I knelt before my small crucifix and tried to pray. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself thinking about Sister and about her question in the garden. "Do you ever feel watched?" Yes, I thought. I feel watched. I feel trapped. I feel like I'm drowning in holy water. The next evening, I reported to Father O'Brien's room as ordered. It was larger than the sisters' cells, with a proper bed instead of a cot and a small sitting area with 2 chairs. He gestured for me to sit, then settled across from me with a gentle smile. "Now then, Sister Catherine," he said, "let us discuss your spiritual struggles." For the next hour, he questioned me about my thoughts, my fears, my doubts. He wanted to know everything. My past before the convent, my relationships with the other sisters, my dreams and desires. I answered as best I could, trying to be honest while fighting the growing unease in my chest. "You're very tense," he observed. "This is common among young women who have not yet learned to trust in God's plan. Perhaps some physical relaxation would help." He stood and moved behind my chair. Before I could protest, his hands were on my shoulders, kneading the muscles of my neck and upper back. I froze, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, that I should run. But where could I go? This was my home now. These were my superiors. If I couldn't trust them, who could I trust? "Relax," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Let God's peace flow through you." I endured it for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When he finally stepped away, I felt dirty, violated in a way I couldn't name. "Better?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good. We'll continue your spiritual direction tomorrow evening. And Sister Catherine, our sessions are private. You are not to discuss them with anyone. Do you understand?" "Yes, Father." "Excellent. Now, let us pray together." I knelt beside him and recited the familiar words, but they felt like ashes in my mouth. As I walked back to my cell, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. The trust one had placed in these holy men was cracking, and through those cracks, I could see something terrible lurking underneath. The sessions continued. Each evening after Compline, I reported to Father O'Brien's room. Each time, the questions became more personal, more invasive. Each time, there was some new form of spiritual guidance that made my skin crawl. I began to understand what Sister Anne had meant about feeling watched. Father O'Brien's eyes followed me everywhere now. During Mass, in the corridors, even in the garden where I worked. Other priests began to take notice of me as well, commenting on my progress, my spiritual development, my potential. I felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, examined and discussed by men who spoke of God's love while their eyes held something else entirely. The other sisters noticed my distress, but when I tried to speak of it, they quickly changed the subject. I began to realize that many of them had been through similar spiritual direction. Their silence wasn't indifference. It was fear. Fear of being labeled difficult, of being transferred like Sister Margaret Teresa, of disappearing like Sister Anne. Fear of questioning men who held the power to define our very worth in God's eyes. I learned to smile and nod, to appear grateful for the attention, to bury my revulsion so deep that sometimes I almost forgot it existed. I learned to float outside myself during those evening sessions, to retreat to a place in my mind where Father O'Brien's hands couldn't reach. But even as I perfected the art of spiritual submission, the real Catherine, the one who asked questions and noticed things, remained awake. She watched. She remembered. She began to understand that what was happening to us had nothing to do with God's plan, and everything to do with the plans of men who used our faith as a weapon against us. And slowly, carefully, she began to plan her own response to the darkness that had invaded our holy sanctuary. I found my ally in the most unexpected place, the convent's archives, where I had been assigned to catalog old records and correspondence. It was considered a privilege, this quiet work among the dusty books and yellowed papers. A sign that I was becoming a trustworthy member of the community. If only they had known what I was really learning in that small windowless room. Sister Helen had been the archivist for 15 years before her death the previous winter. She had been methodical, careful, and apparently much more observant than anyone realized. Hidden beneath the routine correspondence and financial records, I began to find other documents. Notes written in her careful hand. Observations that painted a picture far darker than anything I had imagined. The first discovery was a letter, tucked inside a ledger from 1963. It was addressed to Bishop Crawford, in Sister Helen's handwriting, but it had never been sent. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. "Your Excellency," it began, "I feel compelled to bring to your attention certain irregularities in the spiritual direction provided to our novices. Several young women have expressed distress regarding their private sessions with Father O'Brien. Sister Mary Joseph has requested transfer to another convent, citing spiritual difficulties she is unable to discuss. I fear that our community may be harboring practices that are not in keeping with our holy calling." There the letter ended, unfinished. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding. Sister Helen had seen it too. She had tried to speak out to protect us. But something had stopped her from sending the letter. I continued searching through her papers with new urgency. What I found made my blood run cold. There were lists, carefully maintained records of which sisters had been called for special spiritual direction, and when. Notes about their behavior afterward, their requests for transfer, their sudden departures. A pattern emerged that was so clear, so systematic, that I wondered how I had missed it before. The young ones were always targeted first. The newest novices, the ones still uncertain about their place in the community. They were isolated, told they needed extra guidance, made to feel grateful for the attention. Those who accepted the direction quietly were allowed to stay but were never the same. They became hollow-eyed, withdrawn, aged before their time. Those who resisted or asked questions were transferred or simply disappeared. Sister Helen had documented it all. She had seen what was happening to us, and she had tried to build a case. But in the end, she had been alone, one elderly nun against a system that had been in place for decades. The final piece of evidence was a letter that had been sent, not by Sister Helen, but to her. It was from a former sister named Teresa Mulligan, who had left St. Bridget's in 1961. The letter was brief, but its contents hit me like a physical blow. "Dear Sister Helen," it read, "I was grateful to receive your letter and to know that someone finally understands what happened to us. I have tried to build a new life, but the memories remain. I pray that you will find a way to protect the young women who come after us. They deserve better than what we endured. Please know that if you ever need someone to speak the truth about what happened within those walls, you have my full support. We must not let them silence us forever. Teresa Mulligan." I remembered her name being mentioned in hushed conversations, always quickly changed when Mother Superior appeared. She had been before my time, but clearly, she had experienced the same spiritual direction that was now being forced on me. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. There had been others before me, others who had seen the truth and tried to fight it. Sister Helen had been collecting evidence, building a case, preparing to expose what was happening. But she had died before she could act. The question was, what would I do with what she had left behind? I began to make my own notes, careful to hide them among the legitimate archival work. I documented my sessions with Father O'Brien, the behavior of the other priests, the sisters who had disappeared or been transferred. I noted patterns, dates, names. I started to see the full scope of what was happening at St. Bridget's. It wasn't just inappropriate behavior. It was a system. A carefully orchestrated process of selecting, isolating, and controlling young women who had nowhere else to go. The convent wasn't a sanctuary. It was a hunting ground. And I realized with growing horror that I wasn't the only one who had figured it out. Sister Bernadette found me one evening in the archives, her face pale but determined. "I know what you're doing," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "I've seen you reading Sister Helen's papers." I tensed, ready to deny everything. But something in her eyes stopped me. "I'm not here to stop you," she continued. "I'm here to help." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. "You know about Sister Helen's work?" I helped her with some of it. She was gathering evidence, preparing to take it to the authorities. But then she died and I thought maybe it was better to let it die with her. I was too scared to continue alone. "But you're not alone anymore," I said. She smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from her in years. "No, I'm not." We began to meet regularly, always in the archives where our presence wouldn't be questioned. Sister Bernadette shared her own experiences, her own observations. She had been at St. Brigid's during the worst of it, she told me. She had seen sisters broken by the system, had watched young women's faith be twisted into something dark and damaging. Sister Margaret Teresa tried to fight back, she told me one evening. She started asking questions, making noise. She was going to write to the Vatican, to expose what was happening. That's why she was transferred so suddenly. They couldn't risk her talking. What happened to her? I don't know. She was sent to a convent in Cork, they said. But I wrote to her there, and the letter came back saying no one by that name was in residence. It was as if she had vanished. We worked through the summer, carefully documenting everything we could find. We made copies of Sister Helen's papers, hidden in various locations throughout the convent. We prepared a comprehensive report detailing the pattern of abuse, the systematic targeting of vulnerable young women, the cover-ups and transfers that had allowed it to continue for decades. But as autumn approached, we faced a terrible question. What could we do with the evidence we had gathered? The church hierarchy was part of the system. Bishop Crawford had been coming to St. Brigid's for years, had been involved in the spiritual direction program. Mother Superior was either complicit or willfully blind. The local authorities were unlikely to act against such powerful religious figures. We were two nuns without resources, without connections, without any real power to change anything. But we had the truth. And sometimes, Sister Bernadette reminded me, the truth is enough. The plan came together slowly, like a prayer whispered in the dark. Sister Bernadette had a cousin in Dublin, a journalist who had once written about church matters. She was married now with children, but she still had connections in the media. If we could get our evidence to her, she might be able to help us find someone willing to listen. But first, we had to get out of St. Brigid's. And that was proving more difficult than we had imagined. The months of spiritual direction had taken their toll on me. I had learned to dissociate during those evening sessions, to float somewhere above my body while Father O'Brien spoke of God's love and moved his hands in ways that made my skin crawl. But the strain was beginning to show. I was losing weight, sleeping poorly, jumping at shadows. Mother Superior noticed, of course. She called it spiritual purification, the necessary suffering that came with true devotion. But I could see the calculation in her eyes. I was becoming a liability, a potential problem that might need to be solved. The solution came in the form of a letter, delivered to Mother Superior's office on a gray November morning. I was working in the archives when Sister Frances came to fetch me. "Mother Superior wishes to see you immediately," she said, her voice carefully neutral. I followed her through the corridors, my heart hammering against my ribs. Had they discovered our investigation? Had someone seen us copying Sister Helen's papers? Mother Superior sat behind her desk, the letter open before her. Father O'Brien stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "Sister Catherine," Mother Superior began, "I have received some disturbing news. It seems you have been asking questions about sisters who are no longer with us. You have been making inquiries about transfers, about departures." I said nothing, afraid that my voice would betray me. "This behavior is deeply concerning," Father O'Brien added. "It suggests a restless spirit, a lack of trust in God's plan. I fear that despite our efforts at spiritual direction, you have not overcome your pride." I believe, Mother Superior continued, that you would benefit from a period of deeper reflection. A more intensive spiritual retreat where you can focus solely on your relationship with God. My blood turned to ice. This was how it began. The isolation, the removal from the community, the gradual erasure of a person's existence. There is a small retreat house in the mountains, she went on. Very remote, very peaceful. Perfect for the kind of spiritual work you need to do. You will go there tomorrow. For how long? I managed to ask. Until you are ready to return, Father O'Brien said. Until you have learned proper humility and obedience. I knew I would never return. Not as myself, anyway. The woman who came back, if anyone came back at all, would be broken, compliant, hollow-eyed like so many of the sisters I had seen over the years. That night, I prayed as I had never prayed before. Not to God. I had lost faith in a God who would allow such things to happen in His name. I prayed to Sister Helen, to Sister Anne, to all the women who had been silenced and forgotten. I prayed for strength. And somehow, impossibly, I found it. I went to Sister Bernadette's cell just before dawn. She was already awake, kneeling before her small crucifix with tears streaming down her face. I heard, she whispered. Sister Frances told me. They're taking you away. Then we have to act now, I said. Tonight, before they can stop us. We had prepared for this possibility. Hidden throughout the convent were copies of our evidence. Sister Helen's papers, our own documentation, letters from former sisters who had tried to speak out. We had contact information for Teresa Mulligan, for Sister Bernadette's cousin in Dublin, for anyone who might listen to our story. The plan was desperate, dangerous, and probably doomed to failure. But it was our only chance. We waited until the deep hours of the night, when even the most pious sisters were asleep. Moving like shadows through the corridors we knew so well, we gathered our hidden documents and made our way to the convent's entrance. The door was locked, of course. But Sister Bernadette had been at St. Bridget's for 7 years, and she knew every secret the old building held. There was a side entrance, used for deliveries, that had a lock she could pick with a hairpin and years of practice. What if we're caught? I whispered as she worked. Then we'll have tried, she said simply. That's more than anyone else has done. The lock clicked open. We stepped out into the cold November night, and for the first time in years, I felt the wind on my face without permission, without supervision, without the weight of holy authority pressing down on my shoulders. We ran. Not literally. We were too old for that, too conditioned to quiet movement. But we walked quickly through the sleeping village, our hearts racing, our hands clutching the precious documents that held the truth about St. Bridget's. By morning, we were on a bus to #A nun told the truth about the men inside the women's convent.